Something big is happening in American politics. New polls just dropped, and they're bad news for Donald Trump. More and more Americans are turning away from his message. Is this the beginning of the end for his comeback? Let's break it down.
We are getting a clearer picture of how Americans are feeling about President Trump and his economic policy now 12 weeks into his second term. CNN chief data analyst Harry Inton is here to run the numbers. Hello, Harry. Happy Sunday to you.
You as well.
Okay, so where are we with Americans and how they're viewing the economy?
Yeah, so a CBS News YouGov poll came out earlier today, and I will just say, I'll put it in stark terms, I believe this is the worst poll that Donald Trump has received in his second term, and we can go through it, Jessica. Let's talk about the economy, right? Think the economy is getting worse. Back in November, it was 42% of Americans. You don't have to be a genius to follow this timeline. By February, it was 49%, March, 51%. Look at where we are now, 53%. The clear majority of Americans think the economy is getting worse, and that number is rising. When Trump, of course, won that second term, it was 42%. Now we're up 11 points. The clear majority, 53%. This poll and this number in particular is no bueno for the President of the United States, Jessica.
And who are they blaming for what they are seeing as an economic downturn?
Yeah, okay. So, obviously, you had Joe Biden before you had Donald Trump. And, of course, Donald Trump would say, you know, Joe Biden left us in a horrible state and I have to help dig us out of it. All right, so let's take a look here. More responsible for the state of the economy or the economic state. In March, CBS News asked about inflation, and 38% said it was Joe Biden who was more responsible, compared to 34% who said Donald Trump. Let's jump forward to now, in the month of April. Look at this number, 54% of Americans say that Donald Trump is more to blame for the state of the economy than Joe Biden. Joe Biden's number has fallen from 38% to 21%. Donald Trump may try to blame Joe Biden for this, and maybe that was working a month ago in the month of March. But since the tariff war has begun, it's not working anymore. Americans are not buying what Donald Trump is selling them. They believe, the clear majority, 54%, that Donald Trump is more to blame for the state of the economy at this point than Joe Biden is, Jessica.
That is interesting to see how that evolves just in the last month, really.
Yeah.
How are they viewing tariffs?
Yeah. Okay. So obviously the big thing when it comes to the state of the economy right now for Donald Trump is tariffs. So let's take a look here. All right. The tariff plan, new tariffs on importing goods, oppose versus favor. You go back to January. Look at this. 48% said they favored these new tariffs, these Donald Trump tariffs, compared to 46% who opposed. Look at where we are now in the CBS News YouGov poll. A switcheroo, Jessica, a switcheroo. The clear majority, 58% of Americans oppose these new tariffs compared to just 42% who favor them. Again, this is part of the picture that we've seen throughout this presentation, right, Jessica? More and more people are turning against Donald Trump. Their views of the economy are getting worse. They are holding Donald Trump responsible. And when it comes to his signature issue, so far in his second term, tariffs, I mean, my goodness gracious, that trend line is ridiculously awful for Trump. The opposition number from 46 to 58 and the favor from 48 to 42. Americans have switched on a dime on the economy, on Donald Trump, in large part because of the tariffs, which they increasingly do not like.
And what's the biggest problem with Trump's plan for these people?
Well, I think it's the biggest problem that you hear our analysts say all the time is they don't know what the heck Donald Trump is doing. It's his approach. I mean, take a look here. Trump's approach to tariffs and trade, that is the way he's going about it. Just 37% of Americans like it. Look at this number. 63%, nearly two-thirds dislike it. Among independents, Jessica, it's just 28% of independents who like the way that Donald Trump is approaching tariffs and trade. And that's not much of a surprise because one day Donald Trump is saying one thing, the next day he's saying another. One day someone from his administration saying one thing, the next day that same exact person saying another. The message, simply put, is unclear, and it's the approach more than anything else, Jessica Dean, that the folks in the American public dislike about Donald Trump and his way that he's going about the tariffs and trade policy of the second Trump administration.
Very interesting. And then overall, how does this affect his approval rating?
Yeah, okay, so we talk about the economy, right? But does the economy, the way people feel about the economy, equal the way they feel about Donald Trump overall? Because if it doesn't, if these two paths don't cross, then these numbers don't mean anything.
Right.
But let's take a look right here. Donald Trump's net approval rating. In early February, according to CBS News, look at that, it was +6. Late February +2, March 0, even approval, disapproval. Look at where we are now, -6 points. He's underwater for the first time in the CBS News YouGov poll, at least in his second term. Again, it's the trend line that's so important here, and the trend line and the American people are turning against Donald Trump. And that's why I said at the beginning, Jessica, that this, in my mind, is the worst poll that Trump has received in his second term so far.
All right, Harry Inton, as always, with the numbers there. Thank you so much.
So this week begins with the country and the global economy caught in the grip of uncertainty. If that sounds familiar, it is, since that has clearly become the status quo over the past weeks. Head-spinning uncertainty stemming from President Trump's rollout of his tariff plan. U.S. stock futures, they are on the rise this morning, now after the Trump administration carved out exemptions from the president's reciprocal tariffs on key consumer electronics like smartphones and computers. But that is where the latest round of uncertainty comes in. Exemptions announced Friday night were declared not exemptions at all come Sunday morning. And then by Sunday night, the president himself declared the need for flexibility, saying more targeted tariffs on the semiconductor industry are coming.
The tariffs will be in place in the not distant future because, as you know, like we did with steel, like we did with automobiles, like we did with aluminum, which are now fully on, we'll be doing that with semiconductors, with chips, and numerous other things. And that'll take place in the very near future. You have to show a certain flexibility. Nobody should be so rigid. You have to have a certain flexibility.
The president also indicating that new tariffs are coming on pharmaceuticals. Economists warning that could raise, well, one, the cost of prescription drugs for patients and also worsen what are already serious drug shortages. This morning, we're getting some new insight, as I mentioned, about how Americans are feeling about all of this right now. A new CBS YouGov poll finds that 56% now disapprove of how the president is handling the economy. Also happening today, a not-to-miss meeting in Washington. The European Union's trade chief expected to sit down with his American counterparts after the United States and the EU paused their reciprocal tariffs on each other for 90 days. So let the negotiations begin. CNN's Elena Train joining us right now from the White House. Good morning, Elena. Where do things go today?
I mean, you put it exactly the way I'm framing it, Kate, which is just we are kicking off another week of economic uncertainty. That comes as, of course, President Trump announced last night that he will be imposing new tariffs on the semiconductor industry in the coming days, really kind of confirming that the so-called reprieve that we saw this White House give China and their electronics industry, not really so much of a reprieve. Now, just to get into this a little bit more, on Friday, the White House issued what they called a, quote, clarification of exemptions, which revealed that consumer electronics would be exempt from the tariffs that they imposed on Beijing. Now, at first, this did look like another pleasing market come down, but then yesterday, we really heard the president's top economic advisors kind of muddy the waters, kind of add more uncertainty and confusion to all of this when they did a tour of the Sunday shows. Listen to what they said.
The policy is no exemptions, no exclusions. The policy is in effect. No, there were not exclusions.
What he's doing is he's saying they're exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, but they're included in the semiconductor tariffs, which are coming in probably a month or two.
What happened is, it's not really an exception, that's not even the right word for it. What happened is this type of supply chain moved from the tariff regime for the global tariff, the reciprocal tariff, and it moved to the national security tariff regime.
So, Kate, it is an exemption. It's not an exemption. It's a clarification. All to say they are continuing to muddy the waters here, just pushing more confusion around this broader tariff plan. And as we know, what is true one day is not necessarily true 24 hours later. We saw that happen last week. But I think the bottom line here is that where a lot of people were kind of celebrating these exemptions or these pause on some of these electronic goods, we are now learning that that is a temporary thing as these more sector-specific semiconductor tariffs are expected to come into play in the near future. And also, just to take a broader step to mention that polling, I think this is pretty significant. The new CBS YouGov polling says that 56% of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of the economy. That is up from 52% on March 30th and 49% on March 2nd, all to say not the direction that this White House wants those numbers going.